So hello everybody, welcome to our Q&A with land artist Melanie King. My name's Marie and I'm the co-founder of Land Art Agency. We're a brand new photography agency that launched earlier this year as a response to the climate emergency, as a way to reimagine the role of the photographer in the commercial creative sector. And we're all about exploring how they can shape, transform and create green thinking. In July this year, we wanted to give some of our artists that we represented the opportunity to share their environmental and sustainable photography practices. So we launched our first series of workshops. These workshops were a complete success, and they've led to a brand new series of workshops which are launching this September and October, and also today's Q&A. So two of these workshops that we're running will also be hosted by today's speaker, Melanie King, including using Cafnor as developer and how to make anthrotypes. So on to today's session, which is why you're all here. Melanie King is a visual artist and practice-based researcher at the Royal College of Art, and it's interested in the relationship between starlight, photography and materiality. She's co-director of Lumen and Super Collider and founder of the Alternative Photography Collective. To start the session, Melanie will be talking about her photography background, environmental practice and projects, and then we'll go on to discuss some of the questions that have been shared with us in advance. And then we'll finish the session with some questions from you guys who've joined us today. So for now, I will hand over to Melanie to introduce herself and talk a little bit more about her practice.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Thanks, Melanie.
Hello. So I'm Melanie King, and I am currently, as Marie said, doing a PhD at the Royal College of Art, which is called Ancient Light, Rematerializing the Astronomical Image. And in this research, I'm looking at analog photography and materiality. So I'm thinking about new materialism and thinking about theorists such as Jane Bennett, who wrote Vibrant Matter, thinking about Karen Barad and thinking about how interconnected we are beyond the atom. So thinking about how quantum physics can change our understanding of materiality. So within this PhD that I've been doing since 2015, I've been to quite a few different locations to take analog photographs of the night sky. And what I'm interested in is thinking about that light traveling for thousands, if not millions of years before reaching photosensitive film. So when I look up at space, it makes me think about all of the different people on Earth and all of the different ecosystems, and thinking about how lucky we are in a lot of ways to exist within this cold and dark universe. So that's one of the main things that I'm thinking about at the moment. I've also been to, so this was a residency in Finland at the BioArt Society, and this was also on the same residency, and I was taking part of a residency called Earth Space, and really thinking a lot about the exchange between the cosmic and the earthbound. So working with things like meteorites and taking a lot of photographs of the night sky and doing very low frequency recordings. Again, this is one of the photographs taken in Ireland. I often go out into the night sky, into dark sky areas, thinking about what it is to look up at the night sky. And as a woman, I sometimes find that quite challenging to go out and take these photographs of the night sky, often because I'm alone, and that's quite a new experience for me, actually. Recently, I've moved to Margate and Ramsgate, and this was really important for me because I needed to be away from the light pollution to take some of these photographs, and I felt that locality was important. I think it's really good to value where you are And that's something that I have found more and more as I have lived somewhere outside of a city. I was born in Manchester, um, and I've always lived in a city until 2 years ago. So I'm really enjoying being able to access nature and to be surrounded by nature on a regular basis. I've also been working with different people pre-coronavirus times, taking photographs using moonlight falling onto people's faces, and this is called lunar portraits. So this is Simone Mudd, and she's looking up at the moon. So I ask all participants to look up at the moon and think about, just tell me their experience of what they're thinking about. And often people are thinking that they don't usually look up at the moon for such long periods of time. This is Hannah Fletcher, also one of the co-directors of the London Alternative Photography Collective, which I'll talk about later. So yeah, and I think it really makes us think about the connection between celestial objects and our personal experiences of them. These photographs were taken as part of the first ever sustainable darkroom project at XYZ Books in Lisbon. So I'm just going to show you a few projects which I'll talk about later on. This was the first ever anthotype I made, which was of Pine Island Glacier, and it was the rupture point where the Pine Island Glacier became ruptured into being an iceberg, and it's quite a few miles across, so it was absolutely devastating for that to sever itself and become part of the ocean, and really an illustration of climate change. And I didn't want to represent that in a way which was damaging to the environment, so I crushed up spinach and used ultraviolet light to create this print of the glacier. I've also been working with plant-based developers. This has really been part of the Sustainable Darkroom project that's pioneered by Hannah Fletcher. This was using leftover pasta water, inspired by an artist called Andres Pardo, and he was thinking about, instead of going and picking plants, and instead of going to buy things from the shop, you could just use your kitchen waste. So I was really inspired by that. And these are some results. He mainly uses 16mm film, so I just adapted it very slightly to make a developer. And both of these things are similar to the workshops that I'm giving as part of the Land Art Agency. So the plant-based developer is based on the cathinol recipe, which is really good. And then this is using seaweed, also from the beach in Margate. And this is one of the Hakel's sauna, which is also important because they do a lot of amazing seaweed products. This is part of a residency with the Lay of the Land, and it was a cyanotype that was put into the sea, and I collaborated with 6 different artists on that. And since then, we've done quite a bit of research on the sustainability of the cyanotype process as part of the Sustainable Darkroom residency. We also made a really large print on the grass, so this is completely ephemeral. We covered up the grass for about 3 weeks and then let the sun affect the grass around it, and then uncovered it for about a period of 4 days, and then it faded back to normal. And it was 130 meters long, related to the mines in the background. It's the depth of the mine, and we were interested in showing people the distance that people would have had to travel in the dark to extract copper from below. As mentioned before, I'm a director and a founder of 3 different art collectives. So this is Super Collider, and Super Collider was founded in 2006 by Chris Hatherill, and in 2014 myself and Louise Beer took over the organisation of events in Europe, as Chris was moving to Hong Kong at that time. And we do lots of different things, but we're primarily an art and science agency. So we did, one of the first things that we did as part of Super Collider is we went to Kielder Observatory and we had a look around the forest there and were inspired by that. We took people to James Turrell's sky space so they could see the sun and the moon and the stars through the sky space itself, which was an amazing experience. And we also were able to look through the telescope, so we saw things like the sun and the moon in very high detail, but we also saw things like deep sky objects like nebula and galaxies, which was just amazing to actually see those with your own eye. To think that that light has travelled for thousands, if not millions of years before reaching your eye. We've also started doing things like commissions, so we've worked with Bombus and Parr to make a museum of sleep, and then more recently we worked with Jenna Lawson, who's a biologist in the rainforests in Costa Rica, and visualise some of their sounds. And the idea of the piece is to show how the biodiversity has changed within the past couple of years. I'm also a co-director of Lumen, and we started in 2014. We started in the crypt of St Pancras, and we're particularly interested in astronomy, light and space. And we've worked with maybe about 300 artists over the past 6 years. And we have a space in Bethnal Green, which is in the crypt of a church. And we mainly run exhibitions here, but we've also run different types of events. We're currently closed at the moment, but we're looking at what we can do with the space in the future. This is one of the exhibitions by Julie Hill, who was making work inspired by the James Webb telescope, and she was an artist in residence for 2 weeks. And then we've also been running a residency in Italy from about 2015 until 2018. So this was annual, and we took people to a dark sky space where we had a studio and living quarters, and then we also went to observatories. This is one of the sunsets from Atina. It's incredibly beautiful there, and we usually go at the time of the Perseid meteor shower, so we can see them really clearly, and they look like fireballs. We also have done trips to Campo Catino Observatory, which is the Papal telescope, and it's where it's part of the Vatican. So we were asking questions to people within the church who are also astronomers. And then we do lots of participatory events. So this is Print the Moon, where we get people to look at the moon and take a picture on their phone using the telescope, and then we print that using Polaroid Originals film. This is one of our exhibitions called In Search of Darkness, which was at Crysdale Sculpture Park. And here we were commissioned by Lush to commission artists to make work about light pollution. So this is William Arnold's work, who was looking at moths and the night sky. And in the past couple of months, we've been doing quite a few events as we were funded by Arts Council England. So this is an exhibition that's coming up, which is mainly going to be online, but it's called On Ancient Earth, and it's thinking about how Aboriginal Australians understood the night sky, and thinking about how showing work in the desert and really thinking about our relationship to the night sky. And then we've also started a reading group, which is called Readings for Uncertain Times. And we've been looking at different texts, such as Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. And our next text is going to be Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Well-Kimmerer. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the London Alternative Photography Collective, which is a collective that I founded in 2013 after I finished my MA. And what I was really interested in was raising a discussion about alternative photography processes and making exhibitions that were outside of a traditional gallery space. And the idea was that people could share ideas and swap skills, and that it was non-hierarchical. So we always have asked people to collaborate with us on running events, and that's really important to us. We also want people to feel free to suggest ideas to us and suggest collaborations on projects. And then there's 4 directors, and that is mainly to organise with the administration and website and things like that. So that's myself, Almudena Romero, Hannah Fletcher and Diego Valente, and this is our exhibition at Unseen in Amsterdam. and we were looking at the relationship between analog photography and nature. This was one of our exhibitions called London Pinhole Festival, which we ran for about 3 years consecutively. So here we were interested in artists who were using pinhole photography in lots of exciting and different ways. We've also done things like portrait studios. So this is projects with Almudena Romero, who did a wet plate collodion studio at Elephant and Castle in collaboration with London College of Communication and Photography in the Archive Research Centre. So people were able to sign up and come and get their portrait taken, which was really cool. And then we also did an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery called Making a Photograph, and that was looking at the relationship between making and photography. So just to end, I'm going to talk a bit about the Sustainable Darkroom, which is a project completely pioneered by the amazing Hannah Fletcher. And she was really excited to begin with running this residency with XYZ Books in Lisbon. So we were there for a week, really looking at how you can take apart every aspect of analog photography, like the paper, water usage, silver, plastic, everything, trying to come up with solutions. And this was the result, which is called This Is Not a Solution. The idea being that it's always an ongoing discussion that is to be had, which I think is really important. So this is a few pages from the book. So it's a little bit poetic. It's a little bit of a recipe book. There's lots of images, and yeah, it's all printed sustainably and really asking questions within the book, and making us think about different things. And then in April 2020, we were going to have a residency at Guest Projects in Hackney, and unfortunately we were not able to because of the coronavirus pandemic. So we decided to go completely online. So the first week of April, Diego Valente was running the residency, and everybody was working completely from home for the whole entire residency. But the artists who involved made incredible work within that amount of time. And then in July, we had another residency again with Guest Projects Digital as part of their digital program. And this was a month long with about 40 different artists who were working with different scientists to make more in-depth projects. And this is the result of some of the workshops that were done during this time. So that's something that we produced, which is actually free. You just have to kind of pay postage, and it's a recipe book for lots of different processes, which is really helpful. So that's kind of the end of my talk. So I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much for that, Melanie. I always I love hearing about all the things that you're doing. It just is mind-blowing, the amount of amazing projects that you're working on. And I think just the amount of stuff that you've been doing in this online world as well, and moving all of those residencies and things onto the online world is just amazing. So I'm going to not gush too much, but what I thought I'd start off with is, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, we've had some questions in advance that we're going to run through first, and then we'll hand over to the viewers to bring in some of their questions as well. And one of the first questions we've got, and I think this plays quite nice into some things you've talked about, is just what project that you've done so many projects, which of the ones that you've done do you think has had the most positive environmental impact, and why?
I would say that 100% collaborating with Hannah on the Sustainable Darkroom has been the project with the most environmental impact. And I think that is because we're looking at every aspect of photography. We're looking at and completely turning it upside down. So we're looking at paper and gelatin and plastic and everything like that. And also because there's so many artists involved, so individually everyone's making a different contribution to the research. And yeah, now we have like the publications that we've made. We're sending them out all over the world. So I just it's just really hopeful that lots of people start teaching and using these processes themselves.
Yeah, I think the global impact is just so impressive as well. And yeah, some amazing stuff that's going on. Um, so is there anything that's concerning you? And actually, what's most concerning you today about the creative industry, especially in photography?
I think there's a lot of things that are concerning at the moment. One of the things that I think about a lot is just how you can make a difference with your kind of own personal your kind of personal choices. So a lot of people are working with environmental ideas, but then maybe the process is not environmental, and um, maybe the act of getting to the exhibition, say, or making the work itself can cause environmental issues. So that's the thing that concerns me the most about these environmental, like about creative practice. And I really want to urge people as a practitioner to really think about what they're doing when they're making work and exhibiting and things like that.
No, I think that's such a good point. As obviously as part of Landau Agency, that's one of the core things that we're looking at in the commercial industry as well. Is just everyone looks at the end product so much, but they're not looking at actually what's going on behind the scenes. How are people getting to a shoot, even from the first instance? How are they dealing with catering? There's just so many levels that people just don't even think about when it comes to even creating work that does something really good for the environment in the end product, but not necessarily in the process of creating it. There's so many things that we should be looking at and hoping to improve in the future. So what role do you think as an artist that you can play in environmental discussions?
I think one of the main things is raising awareness and creating a discussion. Um, so really trying to communicate your concerns through your practice. For me, that is incredibly important for me to try and conceive of what's happening in the world. Um, and also things like learning and educating, um, I think is really important.
Is there any way that you think is a good way to be an educator, whether that's through like social media or um, anything like that?
Yeah, I think using social media and sharing ideas and processes is really important. Not holding things as a secret. I think that was one of the things that was really inspiring for me to set up the collective in the first place. It's not to be like super precious about ideas and to be really open, because that's where the interesting discussions happen.
I think that's such a valid point as well, because actually so much of the time as artists you're almost like trying to validate yourself and you're wanting to stand out and have all the answers to everything and be the person who's the unique person in that field, but actually being open to sharing your knowledge and giving people the help is so important, especially when it comes to sustainability. um, oh, so interesting. Have you got any specific tips for greening your practice?
Yeah, I actually wrote them down because I had
It was just too many.
quite a few. Um, so I've put learn as much as you can. So really try to educate yourself and think about what are the things that concern you and what can you improve upon. I guess take apart your practice and analyze it and really think about all of the different composite parts that make it up. Um, and also collaborate with other artists and scientists. I think collaboration throughout all of my working life has been really important, to learn from other artists, and also to work with scientists as well, which is something that we tried to do in the sustainable darkroom, and that really helped, especially when you're working with things like chemistry and foraging. It's really important to know what you're picking and making sure you're um, making the right recipes and not damaging yourself. And that's one thing that I've learned, making my own 3D printed things, is they won't necessarily stand up in water, and they might give dangerous fumes. So yeah,
Always good to make sure you're cross collaborating, I think is the answer there.
scientists, whether that's okay, and it is okay actually.
Yeah, I think that's such a good insight as well. I think sometimes, again, it's going back to that like innate being an artist and wanting to stand out. And sometimes it's about speaking to other people, isn't it? So much that it's so many people wouldn't even think I need to speak to a scientist about this. I'm about to use chemicals. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's a good start. Speak to a chemist.
Yeah, and we worked with quite a few different scientists who really helped us with that. One of them is a photochemist called Mike Ware, and he was the person that was talking about the sustainability of cyanotype in the kind of process that we use mainly. Um, so that's
And then have you got any specific green photography resources that you think people should know about?
Yeah, so I guess the London Alternative Photography Collective, we're really trying to build that up over the next couple of months. So one of those things is our Instagram, which is really important for finding other artists, but also um, the books that we're making. Uh, Curioso Lab, which I talked about before, that is Andres Pardo's lab in Mexico, and he's been working on so many different plant-based developers, and it's really made a good set of recipes. And then Lay of the Land, who are an organisation in Ireland. I wouldn't necessarily say they're related to photography, but they're completely focused on sustainability and greening in arts practice. So they know a lot about pigments and things like that, which would be really good as kind of a collaboration with a photographer.
It's such a handy starter pack, really. And what we'll do as well is we'll get all the information from you, and when as a post-session feedback, we'll send this out to everybody so everyone's got a list of the best resources. Moving on to some of the questions we've already started having in the chat. So thanks everybody. If you have got any other questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat box, or if you want to be really brave, just let us know if you want to ask it on camera, and we can ask you to unmute yourself. But the first question we've got from Morag Patterson is. I think you've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but what did you find out about the sustainability of cyanotypes?
Oh yeah. So we found out from Mike Ware that the chemicals that are used for cyanotypes, so just potassium ferricyanide and ammonium ferric citrate, they used to be quite damaging to the environment in the way that they were mined, but now you can make them synthetically, which is much less damaging to the environment. So I was really keen to know about the sources of the chemistry because they're kind of abstract terms. And then in terms of like how they impact the surrounding environment, because they're diluted so much, they shouldn't really have impact on the environment in that kind of way. And also they're kind of used as fertilizers in things, so they're kind of safe to go into the ground. Yeah, I would recommend reading his book, which is free online, called Cyanomicon, and he goes into a lot of detail on that and has specific parts on environmental practice. But what I would say is his recipe, the Mike Ware recipe, is not actually good for the environment because it has I think it has dichromates in it or something.
So have a read, but maybe don't follow the exact recipe for that.
So yeah, work with the very simple ingredients:
Yeah.
potassium ferricyanide and ammonium ferric citrate, and then it's not damaging. Not a large scale, because part of what the LAPC did was make a really big 10 by 15 meter cyanotype. So it was good to know that that is really not bad for the environment.
I think that's so interesting, just the way that even things like cyanotypes, which have obviously been going on for so long, and just the way that even that's been progressing, and even in recent years, it's just so fascinating. So another question from Caroline. I'm interested in anthrotypes. Do you need to use acetate or something like this to print the negative onto. This in itself doesn't seem sustainable, but perhaps I'm mistaken.
Yes, you're right about negatives. So there's quite a few different things you can do. There's an artist called Kate O'Neill who has been printing directly onto glass. Um, and what she does is she prints the anthotype on cyanotype using that glass negative, and then she can just wipe the image off again. So I think she's been working with Metro Imaging to do that. But there's I imagine there's lots of different ways you could do that. And then some of the artists, as part of the Sustainable Darkroom residency, were experimenting with bioplastic. So that could be another way of making an image.
That sounds so interesting. Yeah, bioplastics, nice. So Elizabeth has asked, do you have experience involving the non-arts community with sustainable thinking?
Ooh, um, yes, I think so. I've been doing quite a few different kind of beach cleans and things like that. So really just taking part in environmental campaigns. But yeah, I haven't done any more like non-art things.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think that's something that I think again, it's one of those narrow-minded things that can sometimes happen a little bit within the industry. Is actually, especially with when it comes to things like sustainability, how can we be speaking to the group? Obviously, arts groups are the ones that are already interested. So how can we be spreading that message to a wider community? It's an ongoing, interesting problem that kind of needs to be addressed in bigger ways, really. So Eileen White has asked, how does new materialism affect your practice?
Um, it has really changed my thinking in terms of how interconnected we all are. Um, Particularly Jane Bennett's Vibrant Matter, which is a really popular text at the moment, which talks about the vitality of matter and thinking of really how the materials that we use, not just in art practice but in everyday life, how that can affect the environment. And then specifically Karen Barad's work, looking at materiality beyond the atom, where we realise that actually there's atoms have a very fuzzy boundary, and yeah, it's incredible to think on that kind of scale. But then I've been doing a lot more research onto people like Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who is a biologist, but she's also a Native American. So she has all of these different strands of knowledges and she's kind of thinking with her ancestral knowledge, but also with her um, knowledge as a botanist and kind of breeding them together, as she puts really nicely in her book. Um, so yeah, all of these different texts to do with new materialism have really all changed my kind of thinking.
Um, so actually, we haven't got another question, but I've just got a question I was thinking of just as you were talking through your presentation. It's just because you mentioned that you've moved from being a city dweller to being a bit more in the countryside. How do you think that that sort of affected your thinking in your practice?
I have been doing things like daily walks and daily runs, and swimming, which really give me a chance to switch off and to notice the environment around me. And really, that kind of puts me in a really calm headspace, which allows me to think. And that's become a really important thing within my life, just to spend time in nature every day. And then that can inspire you creatively, but it can also inspire you within your life as well. So that's been incredibly fascinating.
And then, like retrospectively looking back on your time in the city, have you got any tips for helping people like sort of reconnect with nature in when they're not necessarily surrounded by it all the time?
Yeah, Yeah, because I am from, like I said, Manchester, and I have always lived in a city, and I found it really amazing to go to parks and to walk by the canal and by the river and really connect with nature that way, and also to look up at the sky because you can see the moon and the stars and the planets from London. Um, yeah, and there's also a really amazing group called Phytology who have a nature reserve in Bethnal Green. So going to places like that and learning about the amazing plants that grow within the city is incredible.
I think sometimes it's so interesting to find out what, especially as a London dweller, you can kind of forget that there's a world beyond that 5 minutes outside of your door, and there's so many different things you can be using to explore your own practice beyond what you think is already there. So, where do you see your sustainable projects going in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a good question. um, I think I would like to try and make my artwork as sustainable as possible. So for me, I'm trying to work out step by step how to work with different things. So it would be good just to keep making it more and more and more sustainable at every step. And I think that's something that is really great for collaboration and having these ongoing projects because it's really when we work together that we come up with the best ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that obviously with all the negative that this giant pandemic has caused us, there's the positive is the idea of connectivity and community and just bringing people together, especially people who thought that they would never be able to get together because of distance and all those other things.
Yeah, that's true.
What made you choose analog over digital in terms of sustainability? That's a really interesting question.
Oh, so I'm from a fine art background, so I only came into photography, say, in the past uh, couple of years. I say couple, about 10. But my focus was always on materiality from the very get-go. So I'd learnt about photography through materiality. And that's always been my entrance into it all. Um, yeah.
Um, and then, oh, sorry, are there? Oh, okay, yeah, that's an interesting question as well. Are there any specific goals around each of the groups that you've directed or founded?
Yeah, so Lumen is particularly looking at how artists work with astronomy and light, but we're also trying to, as a large community, understand how different civilizations have understood the sun, moon, and stars throughout time. So yeah, doing more and more research and talking to more and more people and discussing our stories. Uh, yeah, so really find more knowledge about that. And then with the London Alternative Photography Collective, that was set up as a way for skill sharing and knowledge um, exchange and things like that, particularly within analog photography. And then Super Collider is looking at art and science, but from a perspective of trying to raise awareness of our environmental position.
Um, yeah, really interesting. I guess just one other thing. I'm trying to think of one of the other things I was thinking about as you were talking. One of the other things I was thinking about was you spoke about your experience of being a woman when you're going out doing especially the nighttime photography. Do you think that's affected the way that you do your practice in any way? And do you think there's any extra insights that it's almost given you into doing those kind of photographs, really?
Yeah, I think it has changed my understanding of um, experiencing the night sky. And I think that because a lot of the time, like I said, I was in a city and often within a city environment. So going out into the dark was quite daunting. But going out in a kind of rural environment is kind of a different experience. And I think it has changed my photography because I'm kind of allowing myself to spend a lot of time in that environment and to really observe what's going on around me in a different way. And kind of as part of my PhD research, I've been looking at women in astronomy more generally and women who go out into dark landscapes. And it's incredible to think about all of these female astronomers throughout the centuries, and often they were pushed down by their male counterparts, but were really incredible astronomers in themselves.
I think it's actually really fascinating when you look at some of the history of astronomy and look at, they almost was like this man at the not that I want to delve into that kind of argument, but there's always this man at the top and then this sort of group of women underneath them, and actually it's really fascinating to look at the history of women in astronomy. So yeah, this is an advice piece. If anyone hasn't looked at the history of women in astronomy, have a look at it. It's really fascinating. Next question. I'm a textile student wanting to explore giant cyanotypes. Good project. I love the Irish piece. Any other practitioners to look at? Now exploring giant pieces using beetroot anotypes online. Brilliant talk.
Yeah, so let me think. There's an artist called Leah Halloran who's made quite a few large cyanotypes on paper and fabric. And she's also particularly looking at astronomy within her work and female astronomers. There are quite a lot of crossovers. Um, and Constanza Izaza Martinez, who I collaborated with in the first world record cyanotype that we did. She's incredibly knowledgeable about the cyanotype process, so I would really recommend checking out her website.
And then, sorry, I realised I missed a question earlier. What would you recommend if you wanted to start your own sustainable project?
I would say really look at all of the different materials and think about what you're trying to say when you're using those materials. That's really been important for me over the past couple of years. Really thinking about the materiality and what it adds to the message and vice versa.
Sorry, I've just seen that Helen said it was on linen, not online. Sorry, sorry, Helen. Hopefully that answer was still beneficial for you.
Work on linen. I would add something to that.
Yeah.
Just in terms of cyanotype process, I think cyanotype doesn't like alkali, so anything with chalk or alkali substances in it is going to fight against the fabric. So you want to get as pure cotton or linen as possible to make a successful cyanotype.
So purity of cotton. Good to know. How do you approach scientists as collaborators?
So I did a master's in art and science. So that first of all was the first way that I collaborated with scientists, and after that, it really just gave me the confidence to just approach scientists, whether that's in person or whether that's online. I think having like a very clear idea is really important, especially if the scientists that you're wanting to work with are extremely busy. So yeah, I would say just go for it and go for it with like a strong idea. And I think all the scientists that I've ever worked with have been really excited about the potential of working with an artist. So yeah.
No, definitely. I think actually we're running our own residency with some scientists and on space coming up, and actually it's so interesting to be able to speak to the people working in that field, and actually they are always super keen to be involved in anything artistic. So I think just go for it. If you think someone could really benefit your practice, just reach out to them, because they're generally always wanting to be involved with this kind of stuff. So yeah. Definitely. That's the last question. So unless anyone furiously types another question whilst we're finishing up, I think we'll probably close off for now. I'm just going to pull up my little finishing slide. um, so Thank you so much, Melanie. I mean, I've learned so much in this session myself. I hope everyone watching had a really good time. Thank you everyone watching and for submitting your questions. There's some really interesting piece of information in there. Oh gosh, I've just seen that there's panic chats. No, don't worry, okay, they're not questions, that's good to know. Well, don't worry, as mentioned, we will make sure we pass across any of the information that was included in this talk. Oh, sorry, one final question. Any thoughts on using seaweed?
Oh yeah, so I thought seaweed was a really amazing developer. I used Bladder Wrack, um, and I think one of the most important things to think about when you're picking seaweed is to make sure you're not damaging the plant. So the idea is that you wouldn't take very much, so only the amount that you need, and then not to cut it right from the top, but from kind of at the bottom where the little nodules come off, and that means that the plant can grow back successfully. But yeah, other than that, seaweed seems to work really well as a developer. And an artist called Kim Conway is looking at lots of different ways of making seaweed developer with lots of different kinds.
I guess being down in Ramsgate now as well, you've had your time to explore the use of seaweed.
Yeah, and next I want to try salt water as a fixer, which would be cool.
Ooh, really? Well, hopefully we'll have you'll be able to give us another session on your experiences of that.
Yeah.
um, I'll finish up again. Sorry for the slightly abrupt version there. I'll delve back into my end spiel again. Thank you again, everybody. A huge thank you to Melanie for all of your insights and really interesting insights into everything sustainable photography. And thanks to everyone for your questions. You can stay up to date with all things land art related and continue the conversation by following us on Instagram, which our handle is Land Art Collective, or on Twitter at Land Art Agency. As mentioned, we will be sending a little bit of a follow-up email to this talk, and we have been recording it, so we may be releasing that again as well at some point in the future. And also, one last plug, don't forget to take a look at our October series of workshops. You can go to www.landartagency.com/workshops to find out more. So thank you again, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.